As we said in our video on the most effective soldiers of World War II, combat never took place in a vacuum, and there was never truly a fair fight. Different units had different strengths and weaknesses at different places and times throughout the war, and there were many internal and external factors that could influence the outcome of an engagement. This was no different for fighter plane units. Within them, training, leadership, technology, morale, and numbers were crucial factors. Externally, factors such as weather and dumb luck must also be taken into account. With that said, history does tell of fighter units which revelled in success more than others, and it may therefore be perceived that these units were more effective overall. In this video, we're going to consider the fighter pilots of the USSR, Japan, the USA, Germany, and Britain to provide you with our opinion on which were more effective. As with that last video, remember, it's impossible to determine this with total accuracy and objectivity. However, we're going to give it our best shot. As with the last video, we've got to clarify a couple of things. First, we'll try to ignore external factors such as weather and luck. And secondly, we can't cleanly separate fighter units from other military units. Fighters often worked in conjunction with bombers and other aircraft, such as reconnaissance craft. They also worked directly with ground units, providing support for infantry, artillery, and armored units, and they literally flew off the backs of the Navy. Additionally, as with infantry units, fighters coordinated with non-combat support services such as radar teams. And lastly, this video is about the effectiveness of pilots, not aircraft. Yet we must acknowledge that the fighters in which the pilots flew were a hard limiting factor. Harder, indeed, than equipment/technology and infantry units. Once they were in the cockpit and up in the sky, that was it. In the early years of the war, when Nazi Germany turned its guns on the Soviet Union, the Soviets had outdated aircraft, falling short of German craft in many aspects, with height and speed being the most pronounced. Additionally, they were limited by fuel supplies and lacked experienced pilots and leadership. When the Germans struck, the Soviets were overwhelmed, and this strained their resources, further rendering them unable to keep up with the Luftwaffe. But things changed as the war progressed. Via the Lend-Lease policy, the Soviet Air Force received more than 18,000 aircraft from the United States. The Soviets, however, manufactured some 157,000 aircraft themselves throughout the war. Of these, 36,000 were the Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovik, the most produced aircraft design in all military aviation history. But even with these new designs, the Soviets still fell short of the German height and speed, and they had to employ specific tactics to bring the Luftwaffe down to more manageable altitudes. All in all, those inexperienced Soviet pilots gained experience as the war went on, becoming some of the best in the world despite the limitations of their technology. The records are considerably less complete than those of other belligerents, but at least 67 Soviet pilots became aces in the Second World War, with fighter ace Ivan Koshadub claiming 60 to 64 kills in 330 combat missions between the 26th of March 1943 and the 16th of April 1945. The Japanese had almost the inverse story arc of the Soviets. They were at war with China before they were at war with America and the world, and so they entered World War II in December 1941 with a highly skilled air force. Their pilots were the flying elite, selected from the very best of the best. Their iconic aerial steed, the Mitsubishi A6M0, was an effective glass cannon in those early years, though their opponents soon outclassed them, and the Japanese were unable to meet the material requirements of sustaining and developing an air force. Well, that, and they also refused to ground their pilots and give them rest. Japanese pilots remained in their cockpits until they died, and were thus unable to train replacement pilots. As a result, the quality of the Japanese pilots got worse and worse, and they came up against better and better opponents, primarily the pilots of the USAAF in greater abundance and with superior technology. With that said, 335 Japanese pilots achieved acehood between December 1941 and the end of the war. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa is said to be Japan's highest scoring ace, boasting a minimum of 36 aerial victories and an upper estimate of 150. The United States only entered the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Its pilots had the least amount of years in which to gain actual war experience, yet the USAAF finished World War II as arguably the strongest air force in the world. With help from the British, US fighters got better and better as the war went on, and no other belligerent could compete with US production. The USAF had its own logistics system too, allowing it to stay afloat when German and Japanese logistics crippled their air power. USAF fighters, unlike the crafts of their opponents, were designed with the pilot in mind, being easier to use and safer. One other thing they did that their opponents didn't was give their pilots an actual rest and retract them from the aerial battlefield, allowing them to train subsequent pilots. As a result, the quality of USAF pilots only improved as the war went on. The training itself was extensive and pilots were well looked after. USAF morale was high overall, but with no direct threat to their homeland, it wasn't perhaps quite as high as the morale of the RAF. Between December 1941 and the end of the war, 1,297 American pilots achieved acehood, which is just insane. In his P-38 Lightning, Major Dick Bong became America's highest scoring ace, claiming 40 confirmed kills. Overall, the story of the Luftwaffe is similar to that of Japan's Air Force. What differed is that it prepared for war under the limitations of the Treaty of Versailles, meaning its initial numbers were relatively small. This, however, meant that the craft the Luftwaffe did build were built with combined arms, Blitzkrieg, in mind. In place of Japan's Second Sino-Japanese War, Luftwaffe pilots gained their pre-World War II experience in the Spanish Civil War, though, as with Japan, this experience was wasted. Fighter aces were made to fly until they literally died. They didn't, like the Americans, return home to train subsequent pilots once they had claimed a certain amount of aerial victories. This meant that the Luftwaffe's overall skill ran thin as the war dragged on. Production ultimately held the Luftwaffe back, however, and it dragged its feet in Germany's overall strategy. In 1944, fuel became so scarce that many pilots were actually sent to infantry units. With all that said, Germany still boasted more than 2,500 fighter aces between September 1939 and when it was defeated in May 1945. The reason, again, that fighter aces like Erich Hartmann claimed upwards of 300 kills was that Luftwaffe pilots were not withdrawn. As with our last video, we've saved who we thought was the best till last. Like we said before, the USAAF might have boasted the strongest air force, but man for man, we believe Britain's RAF maintained the most effective pilots of the war. The RAF was in the fight from the beginning and they saw it through to the end. They also fought in the skies over their home in the Battle of Britain, a motivating factor whose effect on morale cannot be understated. On morale, the RAF had exceptional training programs which fostered a fighting spirit, and RAF pilots were known for their senses of humour and coolness under pressure. When the Germans hit Poland, the British foresaw the importance of air power in the coming war, and they undertook a massive expansion which included the training of other Commonwealth nations, such as Canada and Australia. British plane technology strived to stay on par or ahead of the German technology, and as the war went on, the British, flying abreast their American allies, overtook the Germans. They did not let their air force drag its feet. The RAF, like the USAF, withdrew its aces once they had achieved a certain number of aerial victories, allowing them to train subsequent aces and improve the overall quality of the air force. But the RAF pilot's most crucial advantage was radar. They were the first to implement it in their air force, and it allowed them to fight the Germans with less planes and more efficiency. With radar and streamlined command systems, the pilots of the RAF, man for man, outclassed all other pilots who flew in the skies of World War II. 753 British pilots became aces between 1939 and 1945, and the highest scoring British-born ace was Johnny Johnson, with 38 confirmed victories. Now, these are just 5 of the many belligerents of the war, but of these, do you agree that Britain produced the most effective fighter pilots? Do you think it was another one of these 5 countries? Do you think it was one we didn't include in this video? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, if you want to join our wider history community, please do check out our Discord server where you can chat with myself and other history buffs. And if you want to help support the channel more than you already are, please do check out our revamped Patreon, where you get access to exclusive content and a way deeper insight into the channel and everything we do here. You get a Discord role, access to our behind the scenes Discord server where we chat and plan, and pretty much everything in between. So if you are keen on supporting the channel and you like the sound of those rewards, then make sure you check it out. And for other exclusive content, go check out our Instagram and our Facebook. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.